Jaxon Drake cursed under his breath as he watched the black Tesla meant to pick him up speed away from the curb without him. He tightened his grip on his leather briefcase, the chilly New York wind tugging at the ends of his navy coat as he scanned the street for another ride. His assistant had booked the Uber minutes ago, but between a last-minute client call and his driver's impatience, he was stranded outside the crowded hotel with a meeting across town in less than an hour. A silver SUV pulled up, the driver waving hurriedly. "Drake?" Jaxon half jogged to the car, yanked the door open, and slid inside without thinking twice. Only when he shut the door and looked up did he realize he wasn't alone. A woman sat on the other side of the back seat, clutching a large to-go coffee and a tote bag filled with books, her wide hazel eyes staring at him like he had just crash-landed into her life. You're not my Uber pool match," she said, her voice light but wary. Jaxon blinked. "Wait. Pool?" The driver glanced at them through the rearview mirror. "You're both headed downtown." "Works out, right?" Jaxon opened his mouth to argue but caught himself. Time was ticking. Besides, the woman beside him didn't exactly look threatening. She looked real. Refreshing, even. No designer labels, no manicured airs. She wore a cozy blue sweater and jeans, her chestnut hair twisted up in a messy bun, a little pen stuck through it like she had just come from a library or a coffee shop. "Fine by me if it's fine by you," he said, meeting her gaze. She hesitated, then gave a small shrug, a smile tugging at her mouth. "Guess we're sharing." The driver pulled into traffic, and for a few moments, silence settled between them. Jaxon pulled out his phone to check his emails, but his attention kept drifting back to her. She was tapping her fingers lightly against her coffee cup, her lips moving slightly as if she was rehearsing something in her head. "You look like you're preparing for battle," Jaxon said, half teasing. She laughed under her breath. "Feels like it. Big interview today. What kind of job?" She glanced at him, her eyes bright. "Editorial assistant." "Dream job, if I'm lucky." He smiled, feeling an unexpected warmth. "What's your name?" "Peyton Carter," she said. "And you?" "Jaxon Drake." Her eyebrows lifted a fraction. "You sound like you own a yacht." He chuckled. "Not today. Today I'm just a guy who missed his ride." She laughed again, the sound light and easy, and Jaxon felt something shift inside him. He hadn't laughed genuinely in what felt like weeks. They talked the rest of the way downtown, and Jaxon found himself strangely reluctant when the car finally pulled up at Peyton's stop first. She gathered her bag, hesitating before opening the door. "Good luck with whatever important thing you're late for." He grinned. "And you? Knock them dead." Peyton smiled, her hand lingering on the door handle. "Maybe I'll see you around." Before he could reply, she was gone, disappearing into the swirling crowd. The car pulled away, but Jaxon leaned back in his seat, still staring at the door she'd vanished through. "Sir?" the driver said. "Yeah," Jaxon murmured, a slow smile tugging at his mouth. "Let's go." But even as he headed to one of the most important meetings of his career, all he could think about was the girl with the coffee-stained sweater and the fearless eyes. Later that night, Jaxon sat at the bar of a rooftop lounge, nursing a glass of bourbon and scrolling mindlessly through his phone. The meeting had gone fine. Better than fine. But something was missing, a hollow undercurrent he couldn't shake. And then he saw her. Across the room, Peyton Carter stood near the balcony, holding a glass of wine and laughing with another woman. The city lights glittered behind her like a million stars. Without thinking, Jaxon pushed away from the bar and crossed the room. "Hey, stranger," he said when he reached her. Peyton turned, surprise lighting her face. "Jaxon! What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing. My friend dragged me here to celebrate." "I got the job," she said, her smile so bright it made the whole room feel warmer. "That's amazing," Jaxon said, meaning it. He hesitated, then added, "Let me buy you a drink to celebrate." She laughed. I already have one. Then let me buy you dinner. Peyton blinked, studying him. You don't even know me. Maybe I'm trying to fix that. There was a pause, a heartbeat where the city noise faded and all that existed was the two of them. Then Peyton tilted her head, that same fearless gleam in her eye. All right, Jaxon Drake. One dinner. He smiled, something blooming wide and sure in his chest. They left the party behind, slipping into the crisp night. Jaxon didn't call a cab. Instead, he walked beside her down the bustling street, their hands brushing occasionally, every small touch sparking like electricity. They ended up at an intimate little Italian restaurant tucked between two skyscrapers. No reservations, no fanfare. Just candlelight, wine, and the kind of conversation that made hours feel like minutes. Jaxon learned that Peyton loved old books, hated olives, and dreamed of someday publishing her own stories. Peyton learned that Jaxon ran a company, though he didn't mention he was the CEO of Drake Enterprises, one of the biggest tech firms in the country. It felt nice, being just a guy for once. By the time they stepped back into the cool night air, Jaxon knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just a chance meeting. It was the beginning of something he didn't even know he was starving for. They paused under a streetlight, the city humming around them. I don't want this night to end, Jaxon said, his voice low. Peyton smiled up at him, her cheeks pink from the wine and the cold. Maybe it doesn't have to. And before he could overthink it, before she could second-guess it, Jaxon leaned down and kissed her. It was slow at first, tender, but then her hands curled into his coat, and he deepened it, pouring everything he felt, everything he didn't have words for, into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, Peyton was breathless, her eyes shining. Wow, she whispered. Jaxon rested his forehead against hers, his heart thundering. Yeah. Wow. He didn't know how, he didn't know when, but deep down, Jaxon Drake knew one thing for certain: he was already falling for her. And he wasn't planning on stopping. The following morning, Jaxon sat in his penthouse office, staring at the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His assistant, Claire, rattled off his schedule for the day, but he barely heard her. Mr. Drake, the charity gala tonight, cancel it, Jaxon said, still watching the horizon. Claire paused, blinking behind her glasses. Sir, you're the keynote speaker. Jaxon dragged a hand through his hair. Fine. I'll go. Just move the dinner with the investors to tomorrow. Claire scribbled a note and left without another word. She was used to his last-minute mood swings, but even he knew this wasn't just work stress. He couldn't stop thinking about Peyton. The way she talked with her hands when she got excited. The way her laugh seemed to crack the cold edges off the world. He knew better than to get distracted. Business came first. Always. But as he stared at the untouched coffee on his desk, he knew something had already shifted. That evening, he arrived at the gala in a tailored black tuxedo, the heavy gold cufflinks a silent reminder of the life he led. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and polished smiles. He shook hands, made polite conversation, but his mind kept drifting. Halfway through a tedious conversation about tax shelters, he spotted her. Peyton wore a simple black cocktail dress, her hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She stood near the silent auction table, studying a painting with a furrowed brow. Jaxon excused himself, weaving through the crowd until he reached her side. You have good taste, he said. Peyton turned, her eyes lighting up in surprise. Jaxon! What are you doing here? Business charity event. What about you? My boss dragged me here, she said, wrinkling her nose. Apparently, networking is part of the job. He chuckled. Consider yourself officially networking. Her lips curved into a playful smile. And what exactly do you do, Mr. Drake? He hesitated. Part of him wanted to keep the illusion a little longer, to stay just Jaxon. Not the billionaire CEO. Not the man who lived in penthouses and closed deals worth more than small countries. But he couldn't build anything real on a lie. I run a tech company, he said carefully. Drake Enterprises. Peyton blinked once, then again. Wait. Drake Enterprises? The one that just bought out Next Tech? He nodded, bracing himself. Instead of looking impressed or intimidated, Peyton burst out laughing. Well, that explains why you didn't flinch when the Uber driver tried to charge you double. Relief flooded him. You're not freaked out? Peyton shrugged, lifting her wine glass. You're still the guy who hijacked my ride and debated the best pizza place in the city for 10 blocks. He grinned. Glad my reputation precedes me. Before he could say more, a sharp voice interrupted. Jaxon, a woman in a sequined gown said, clutching his arm. We need you for the group photo. He barely glanced at her. Give me a minute. The woman's eyes narrowed as she stalked off, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor. Peyton raised an eyebrow. Friend of yours? Not even close, he said, and it was the truth. Peyton's eyes danced with amusement. You're trouble, Jaxon Drake. And you're fearless, he said, feeling the words settle between them like a promise. The photo op waited. Investors waited. His whole carefully crafted world waited. But none of it mattered as much as the woman standing in front of him. Come with me, he said impulsively, offering his hand. Peyton hesitated only a second before placing her hand in his. They slipped out a side door, leaving behind the glittering chaos of the gala. Outside, the night was cooler, the city stretching in every direction like a living, breathing thing. Where are we going? Peyton asked, laughing as she tried to keep up with his long strides. You'll see. He led her to a sleek black car waiting at the curb. His driver, Marcus, opened the door without a word. Peyton hesitated. Is this kidnapping? Jaxon grinned. Only if you say no. She laughed again, the sound chasing away the last of his doubts. She slid into the car, and he followed. Marcus pulled into traffic, expertly navigating the city streets. Peyton looked around, taking in the plush leather seats and subtle gold accents. This is not an Uber. No, Jaxon admitted. But it's more fun, right? She shook her head, smiling. You're unbelievable. They drove for 20 minutes, the conversation flowing easily. Peyton told him about the crazy submissions she had to sort through at work, everything from love poems to rants about aliens. Jaxon listened, genuinely fascinated. Finally, the car pulled up to a small private rooftop garden. Peyton's mouth fell open as she stepped out. Twinkling fairy lights draped across trellises, and a single table was set up under a canopy of stars. A violinist played softly in the corner, the music drifting over the warm evening air. You did all this? She whispered. I made a call, he said casually, though his heart hammered in his chest. Peyton turned to him, her face unreadable. Why? Because I wanted tonight to be something you'd never forget. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled, a slow, breathtaking smile that made the whole city fade away. I won't, she said softly, reaching for his hand. They sat down to dinner, the world shrinking to just the two of them. And for the first time in a long time, Jaxon Drake wasn't thinking about mergers or quarterly reports. He was thinking about what it would feel like to wake up to that smile every day for the rest of his life. Jaxon couldn't remember the last time he lingered after a meal, but tonight he stayed, elbow propped on the table as Peyton sipped the last of her wine, her cheeks flushed from laughter. The violinist had packed up an hour ago, leaving only the faint hum of the city beneath them. The night stretched out, thick with something neither of them dared name yet. Peyton leaned back in her chair, tilting her face up toward the sky. I can't believe you found a place like this in the middle of Manhattan, she said, her voice soft. Most people don't notice what's right above them, Jaxon said, watching her, not the stars. She glanced at him, a thoughtful expression flickering across her face. Is that what you do? Stay above it all? Jaxon hesitated, the question cutting closer than he liked. I used to think I had to, he admitted. Keeps things simple. Simple's overrated. Peyton said, setting her glass down. Messy is where all the stories are. He laughed under his breath. You really are something else, Peyton Carter. She shrugged, a teasing light in her eyes. You're the one who decided to share a car with a complete stranger. And I'm glad I did, he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Peyton's smile faltered slightly, something cautious flashing across her face. This feels fast. Jaxon leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. It doesn't have to be scary. She studied him, her fingers tracing the rim of her empty glass. I'm not scared of you, Jaxon. I'm scared of what happens when the real world catches up. It won't, he said, more fiercely than he intended. Peyton's eyes softened, but she shook her head slightly. You can't promise that. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. She was right. He couldn't control everything, no matter how many companies he bought or skyscrapers he built. But damn if he wasn't willing to try for her. Before he could answer, Peyton pushed back her chair and stood, her heels clicking softly against the tile. I should go, she said, her voice low. Jaxon rose immediately, instinct overriding thought. Let me take you home. Peyton hesitated, then nodded. Together, they made their way back down to the street, the night cooler now, the sidewalks glinting faintly under the streetlights. Marcus pulled up without needing to be called, as if he had been waiting all along. Peyton slid into the back seat, folding her hands primly in her lap, her earlier ease replaced by something more guarded. As they drove, Jaxon studied her profile in the dim light. She was pulling away, he could feel it, slipping through his fingers like smoke. When they reached her building, a modest brownstone tucked between a bakery and a worn bookstore, she turned to him. Thank you, she said, her voice steady. Peyton, he started, but she shook her head. This was incredible. But I need time to think. He wanted to argue, to tell her there was nothing to think about, that whatever this was between them, it was real and worth chasing. But he could see something in her eyes that stopped him. A need for space, for air. So instead, he nodded once. I'll wait. Peyton's lips parted slightly, surprise flickering across her face. Then she smiled, small and genuine. Good night, Jaxon. He watched her disappear into the building, the door closing quietly behind her. The car was silent as Marcus pulled back into the street, but Jaxon barely noticed. His mind was already racing, trying to figure out how to give Peyton what she needed without losing her altogether. The next few days dragged by in a blur of meetings and hollow conversations. Jaxon found himself distracted, snapping at his team, forgetting appointments. Claire eventually cornered him outside the elevator. Sir, if you don't take a day off, you're going to lose more than just your patience. Jaxon stared at her, realization hitting him hard. He wasn't just distracted. He was in love. And he needed to show Peyton that this wasn't just a fling or a fantasy. It was real. That night, he made a call. A week later, Peyton found herself standing in front of her favorite bookstore, frowning at the closed for private event sign taped to the door. She glanced at her phone. No texts. No explanations. Just a mysterious note slipped under her door an hour ago, "Come find me." Heart pounding, she pushed the door open. Inside, the lights were dimmed, the shelves draped in soft, golden cloth. Candles flickered on every surface, their glow reflecting off hundreds of tiny paper stars hanging from the ceiling. In the center of the room stood Jaxon, holding a battered copy of her favorite novel, the same one she had mentioned in passing during their first dinner. Peyton froze, overwhelmed. I bought out the bookstore for the night, Jaxon said, his voice rough. I wanted to give you a story worth remembering. She took a step closer, her heels silent on the worn hardwood floor. You remembered. I remember everything about you, he said simply. Peyton's throat tightened. She looked around, taking in the details, the quotes from classic novels written on the walls, the table in the corner set for two, the soft music playing in the background. He had created a world just for her. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Jaxon crossed the distance between them, cupping her face gently. I know this is fast. I know it's messy. But I'm not afraid, Peyton. Not if it's with you. She let out a shaky breath. You're insane. I know. You're impossible. I hope so. She laughed through her tears, the sound breaking open something inside her. Then, without hesitation, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It wasn't tentative or careful. It was fierce, desperate, a collision of everything they had been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, Jaxon rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Peyton nodded, her hands fisting in the front of his jacket. Always. Around them, the paper stars swayed gently, as if the universe itself was sighing in relief. Jaxon smiled, an unfamiliar but welcome feeling of peace settling into his chest. He had missed his ride once. But somehow, against every odd, he had found exactly where he was meant to be. Rain speckled the windows of Jackson's penthouse as Peyton curled against him on the leather couch, a blanket tangled around their legs. The city below blurred into shimmering rivers of light, but neither of them were looking outside. Peyton traced absent shapes on the back of his hand, her touch feather light. Do you ever get tired of it? She asked quietly. He brushed his thumb along her knuckles, savoring the simple intimacy. Tired of what? All of it, she said, lifting her gaze to his. The endless meetings. The expectations. Everyone knowing your name before they know you. Jaxon hesitated, surprised by how easily the truth came to him with her. Sometimes. It feels like living inside a glass box. Everyone watching, waiting. Peyton nodded thoughtfully. I know a little about that. Her voice grew softer. After my dad left, people treated my mom and me like charity cases. Every word felt loaded. Every smile had pity behind it. Jaxon tightened his fingers around hers. I'm sorry. She shook her head. It made me stronger. It made me careful about who I let in. He watched her, the fierce set of her jaw, the vulnerability she didn't bother to hide. And you let me in anyway. You didn't give me much of a choice. She teased, her mouth curving. His chest ached with the force of what he felt. He wanted to give her more than late-night talks and borrowed bookstores. He wanted permanence. Peyton's stomach growled loudly, breaking the heavy moment. She covered her face with both hands, laughing. Oh my God, that's humiliating. Jaxon chuckled, the tension between them dissolving. Come on, let's fix that. He stood, tugging her to her feet. They moved into the sleek kitchen, where he rifled through the fridge and pulled out a carton of eggs and a block of cheese. You're going to cook? Peyton asked, skeptical. He raised an eyebrow. You're doubting me? She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Prove me wrong, Mr. Drake. An hour later they sat cross-legged on the kitchen island, eating omelets off mismatched plates. Peyton took a bite and closed her eyes in exaggerated bliss. Okay, I take it back. You have hidden talents. He grinned, pleased in a way he hadn't felt after any boardroom victory. There's more where that came from. After they finished, Jaxon took her hand and led her back to the living room. This time, he didn't sit. Instead, he pulled her to the middle of the room, the city lights casting a soft glow around them. He pressed a few buttons on his phone, and a slow, jazzy melody filled the air. Peyton laughed, startled. You're not serious. Dance with me, he said, tugging her closer. She hesitated just a second before sliding her arms around his neck. They swayed together, the music wrapping around them, the world narrowing to the space between their bodies. You know, Peyton whispered, her breath warm against his collarbone. This is dangerously close to a fairy tale. He leaned down, his lips brushing her temple. Good. Because I'm planning on the happy ending. She pulled back slightly to look at him, her expression tender and searching. Are you sure? He cupped her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. I've never been more sure of anything. Peyton's eyes glistened, but she smiled, a new kind of certainty lighting her face. Then so am I. Jaxon kissed her, slow and deep, anchoring himself to the only thing that felt real in a world that constantly shifted beneath him. When they finally broke apart, Peyton rested her forehead against his chest, her voice muffled. This doesn't feel real. He held her tighter. Then we'll make it real. The next morning, Jaxon made a call. 3 days later, Peyton stood in front of a gleaming glass building, clutching a portfolio under one arm. She glanced sideways at Jaxon, who offered a reassuring nod. They're expecting you, he said, opening the door for her. Inside, the receptionist greeted Peyton warmly and ushered her toward a conference room. Peyton turned back to Jaxon, wide-eyed. You didn't. I didn't pull strings, he said, reading her mind. I just made sure your manuscript landed in the right hands. She stared at him, stunned. You read it? Every word, he said. You're brilliant, Peyton. You deserve this shot. Emotion clogged her throat, but she managed to whisper. Thank you? He kissed her forehead. Go knock them dead. As she disappeared down the hallway, Jaxon leaned against the wall, a rare sense of peace settling into his bones. He hadn't just found love. He had found someone who made him want to be better, to strip away the layers and just be Jaxon, not the CEO, not the billionaire, just a man in love. Later that night, they stood on the balcony of her apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and crimson. Peyton leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. You know, she said, her voice dreamy, none of this would have happened if you hadn't missed your Uber. He laughed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Best missed ride of my life. She tipped her face up to his, her eyes dancing. Mine too. He kissed her again, the city stretching out endlessly before them, but neither of them needed it. They had found everything they needed in each other. And this time, neither of them would ever let go. Peyton brushed a strand of hair behind her ear as she stepped into the sun-drenched atrium of Drake Enterprises 2 weeks later, holding a slim envelope in her hand. The publishing house Jaxon had introduced her to had officially made an offer for her novel, and today, she was finalizing it. The moment felt bigger than anything she had ever allowed herself to dream. Jaxon was waiting for her by the security desk, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, looking every bit like he belonged in the gleaming tower of glass and steel. Yet when he saw her, all the corporate sharpness melted into something tender. Ready to make history? He asked, offering his hand. She slipped her fingers into his. Only if you're standing beside me. They rode the elevator up to the executive floor. Peyton kept glancing at him, still not quite believing this was her life now, not because of the luxury around her, but because of the way he made her feel like she could do anything. After signing the papers, they returned to the penthouse, where Jaxon disappeared into another room without explanation. Peyton wandered onto the terrace, marveling at how the city stretched endlessly in every direction, a testament to ambition and stubborn dreams. Behind her, she heard the soft pad of his footsteps. When she turned, she froze. Jaxon stood there, holding a small velvet box, his blue eyes steady and sure. I told myself I'd wait, he said, voice low. Give you time to settle into this new chapter. But the truth is, Peyton, I don't want to spend another day without knowing you're mine. Her heart raced so fast she could barely breathe. He opened the box, revealing a delicate diamond ring, the stone set in a band so intricate it looked almost like lace spun from silver. You're the story I never knew I needed, he said. The only thing that makes sense in a world that never stops spinning. Marry me, Peyton Carter. Let's build something messy and beautiful and all ours. Peyton's vision blurred with tears, but her voice was clear when she answered. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Jaxon slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly for the first time since she had known him. Then he pulled her into his arms, lifting her clean off the ground as he kissed her, laughter mingling with happy tears. Later that evening, they celebrated in a way that felt perfectly them. No gala, no pretense, just a quiet dinner on the rooftop where they had first really seen each other. Strings of fairy lights flickered overhead, and the same violinist from their first date played softly in the background, a private concert just for them. Peyton leaned back in her chair, a glass of champagne in hand, watching Jaxon with a fondness so deep it felt stitched into her bones. "You know," she said, swirling the golden liquid in her glass, "for a man who supposedly thrives on control, you're terrible at waiting." He laughed, setting his glass down. "I waited long enough." She reached across the table, lacing her fingers with his. "I'm glad you didn't." The next morning, they boarded Jackson's private jet bound for a small island he had purchased quietly a year ago, a place he had never shared with anyone, a piece of paradise he had kept hidden until he found someone worthy of it. As the plane soared into the clouds, Peyton curled against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," she murmured. He thought for a moment, then said, "I used to believe love was a weakness. That needing someone would make me vulnerable." She tilted her head to look at him. "And now?" He kissed her forehead, his voice a whisper against her skin. "Now I know it's the only thing that makes me stronger." When they arrived, the island was everything Peyton had imagined: white sand beaches, crystal clear water, and a villa tucked between palm trees, designed with understated elegance. No opulence for opulence's sake, just quiet, intentional beauty. They spent the days swimming, exploring hidden coves, and lying tangled together under the stars, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in fire and gold, Jaxon led her down a narrow path to a secluded stretch of beach. A small archway made of driftwood and wildflowers stood waiting, and a minister in simple white robes smiled as they approached. Peyton covered her mouth with her hands, tears already welling in her eyes. "I didn't want to wait," Jaxon said, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I didn't want anyone but you and the sea as our witnesses." She could only nod, unable to find words. They exchanged vows barefoot in the sand, the ocean breeze carrying their promises out into the endless blue. When Jaxon placed the ring, a simple gold band that matched hers, onto her finger, Peyton felt something settle deep in her soul, like every restless piece of her had finally found home. "You're stuck with me now," she whispered, teasing through her tears. He laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Forever sounds perfect." The kiss they shared then was different from every kiss before, not urgent or tentative, but full of the quiet certainty of two people who had found exactly what they never knew they needed. As night fell, they danced under the stars, the soft strains of music blending with the sound of the waves. There were no crowds, no flashing cameras, no expectations. Just Peyton and Jaxon. Two hearts that had collided by accident but stayed by choice. Years later, when people asked how they had met, Peyton would always smile and say, "He stole my Uber." But what she never said, what she kept tucked close to her heart, was that the real miracle wasn't the meeting. It was everything that came after. The love that wasn't born from perfection, but from the beautiful, messy, fearless choice to stay. And every single day, they chose each other. Over and over again. Without hesitation. Without regret. Forever.